Are you going to give up the new beginning for a dead end that's dead for a reason? You have to be very careful about new beginnings, because that energy of newness is also very fickle, and that's the reason why a lot of people nowadays ghost people, because they just can't draw a healthy boundary. They can only be there, bitch about the situation. Hi guys, welcome or welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to the Cozy Calendar podcast. If it's your first time seeing me, my name is Victoria and this is Victoria's Reveries, a channel where we talk about living our best lives, self-care and healing, and doing the inner work. So today on the Cozy Calendar podcast, we have episode 5 and we are talking about new beginnings. Speaking of which, I have my drink for the day, and you know what this means? This means it's a busy day. I didn't have enough time to make a cup of hot tea or coffee before this, and I certainly don't have time right now. So let's just get this going. But that is not an excuse for you to not have your drink, of course, unless you're in the middle of traffic when you're listening to this. But get your drink and get comfortable, because today we're going deep. Okay, we always go deep. I just wanted to say that. So today we're talking about new beginnings. I think this is an amazing episode to have after having an amazing episode 4, which was all about taking control. So after taking control, where do you go from there? I think it's a very important thing to consider, because when it comes to changing your life, I would never recommend for anyone to do anything that isn't prior strategized, prior planned, and things can go haywire if you're not properly planning your steps, if you're not properly executing things according to your plan. And yes, I know that we plan and God laughs, or we plan in pencil and God goes with an eraser changing things up. And 9 times or maybe 7 times out of 10, the plan doesn't always work, but it's very important to have a plan. So if you were in the position where you're now learning how to take control in your life, it's important to consider new beginnings. And how I like to think of new beginnings, when I was writing the general plan for this episode, I thought, how would I define new beginnings? Of course, you don't need for me to define it, but I would like to word it in my own way. And I thought of the Matrix movie. It's not a movie I've watched so many times, or too many times that is, but it's a movie that I think has a lot of lessons to learn for society and for people in general. And when I think of new beginnings, I think of becoming your own Neo. For those who haven't watched the movie, spoiler alert, Neo is the main character who is supposed to save the world as we know it from becoming worse than it already has. There were normal human beings and there were people in the Matrix who weren't really real people. I forget the name that they used. I'm going to put it on the screen. But they weren't real people. And Neo came along to basically save humanity. And of course, you're not saving humanity right now, at least. We're hoping that you can just save yourself. And when I think of Neo, I think that we all have to become our own Neo in order to seize new beginnings. And I don't know whether this was premeditated, but I realized that the term Neo means something. It means new. I'm not sure if it's Latin, but like when people say neo jazz, they mean a genre of jazz that's more modern. It's not like the 50s, 60s, 30s jazz. So when it comes to becoming your own Neo, I would like to share my story of how I became my own Neo by giving you tips that I believe will come in handy. And unlike in the previous episodes, I'll just be talking about the tips as I talk about how they relate to me. I'm still pretty much in a stage where I haven't seen a huge chunk of my life play out yet, so I don't think I'm sufficiently equipped to come and share all my new beginnings, but I have 1 or 2, 3 things that I think could come in handy for you. And I'm really not trying to dumb myself down. That's why I'm smiling, because I realized it might look like I'm downplaying something. I'm really not. I always like to share from a place of certainty, and I also like to protect my privacy, so I wouldn't share anything that isn't completely set in stone for at least a reasonable period of time. All that to say that I'll be sharing my story alongside the tips that I'm rolling out, unlike when I share tips and then I share my story. And I know that it won't make much of a difference, because what matters is that you have the tips and that you are able to create the life of your dreams. In our society in general, we romanticize new beginnings. And I'm not one who's a stranger to that. I'm not too proud to admit that I love the new year. I love making resolutions. I love being part of that new energy. And new energy is beautiful. It makes you feel rejuvenated. It makes you feel fresh. It makes you feel like there's something to look forward to. And I think that is very beautiful. But when it comes to new beginnings in different stages of your life, it might not be as romantic as you want it to be. Because what we forget in society is that for every new beginning, there is an old ending. And I've just come up with that, but that is just to mean that every time you're opening a new door, there's one that you've closed. And inevitably, closing doors on people, on situations, on romantic partnerships, on perhaps jobs, that's not an easy thing to do, and therefore those old endings come with a lot of grief. And if you're not careful, you could accept an attitude of dejection, an attitude of jadedness that makes you even fail to perceive the new beginning happening in your life. I know that we may not all be Christians here, but allow me to just use this. The Bible has a verse that says something like, "See, I am doing a new thing and now it springs up. Do you perceive it?" So a new thing could be happening, but not everyone is able to perceive it. I have a conspiracy theory that somewhere during COVID, something new happened to how we experience time. Or maybe I should go on Reddit and see if there's more people like me who feel that way, because I can tell you, like right now, it's morning, but I know by the time I'm done filming this video, for whatever reason, it'll be half an hour, and then I look at the time, it's going to be 2 p.m. and I'll be flooded with things to do. What I'm trying to say is there was a change that I feel occurred. And the thing that makes it interesting for me is that it feels that not everybody perceived that change. Something I like to stress a lot in front of you guys on this channel is there are changes happening on the financial landscape in the whole world at large. Are you able to perceive it? And if you want more on that, check out my last video that I did about last week, I believe, on life tips that nobody really shares with you, that people generally tend to gatekeep. I'll link it above, and I know that it's gonna be a game changer for someone who has never heard those tips. Now back to the topic. Do you perceive that you have changes around you? Now that's a very difficult thing. When we see new beginnings, we become very romantic about them, and then because we are thinking only with our hearts, we tend to forget that, oops, that means that I can't do this anymore, or I can't be with this person anymore, I can't. And then that sadness starts to cloud the new beginnings. I'd really encourage anyone out there to recognize that the first thing that comes with the new beginnings is old endings. And sometimes those endings need to be had. Endings with toxic people, endings with toxic marriages, toxic relationships, familiar relationships, friendship relationships. You need to cut those dead ends off, because just like with split ends in your hair, if you don't cut the dead ends off, the dead ends are gonna come up and they're gonna get the good hair out. They're gonna reduce the quality of the good hair, the hair that doesn't have the split ends. And in the same way, if you don't cut those dead ends off, those dead ends are gonna come for your new beginnings. So you have to objectively sit down with yourself and ask yourself, are you going to give up the new beginning for a dead end that's dead for a reason, or are you going to give up the dead end, face the grief, and proceed to new beginnings? I think you probably know what I would say about that. In order to realize the beauty of new beginnings, we need to learn the art of release. Last week, on the episode on taking control, I believe I shared a story about the power of the tongue and how I was in a situation whereby I was just in my thoughts, meditating and praying. I was very overwhelmed in a particular environment, and I told God in my prayer, okay, God, I'm overwhelmed, and I can tell you that I'm not speaking out of anger right now. I'm speaking out of fatigue, and I'm speaking out of exhaustion, emotional exhaustion. I can't, and mental exhaustion. I can't do this anymore. Thank you for the while that this situation has been in my life. Thank you for the lessons I've learned. Thank you that I've had good experiences as well. And now I am ready to release. When you come into agreement with release, rapid things happen. Movement occurs, opportunities occur where there were none, connections re-establish where they were perhaps moderate or just dormant. Things happen, movement occurs. I wish you really understood just how much your words, your intentions, and most importantly, your decision to achieve something, it pushes out your thoughts, and your thoughts impact reality. That's basically just the science of the law of assumption. Without even labeling it anything, that's just how reality works. Unfortunately, we don't all perceive our power, but I want you to know that the art of release is something that you really need to establish within yourself in order to seize new beginnings and release old endings. I'd also encourage you not to be the type of person who can only have endings with people in horrible circumstances. There's people I know who they either are pretending to be okay with everybody, and at the same time, when discomfort occurs, when uncomfortable situations occur, they don't healthily confront these people. They don't have healthy conflict mechanisms and resolution tactics with them. They are kind of blue in this area. The problem of operating this way is that you don't know how to draw boundaries. Again, if you haven't watched my video on drawing boundaries and healthy boundaries at that, go check out my video from last year. It's going to be linked above. Now, when you have healthy boundaries, you are able to say, hey, I didn't like what you did. I didn't like this and that. And then if you're not able to continue with that situation, you sever the ties. And that's the reason why a lot of people nowadays ghost people, because they just can't draw a healthy boundary. They can only be there, bitch about the situation, while at the same time doing completely nothing about it. So it creates a situation whereby you have someone who can never be at peace with people. They're either pretending to be at peace with people, right? So it's either fake peace and complete silence. And I think it's quite unhealthy. So learning the art of release is very, very important. Secondly, when it comes to healing, and when it comes to seizing new beginnings in your healing journey, you realize that because you have released old endings, there's an inevitable grief that comes about. Grief is the result of any loss of a human being who was in your life, pain, dejection, disappointment in life. That causes grief. You can even have grief regarding things you didn't experience, like if you wanted to be a mother within the course of your life, or if you wanted to get married within the course of your life, and for one reason or another these things don't happen to you, and you attached a high degree of importance to them, which, you know, becoming a mother and having a family or getting married, those are important, or those are not everyday things to do. So yeah, someone could attach a high degree of importance to them, understandably. These things don't happen. You could encounter grief because you feel sad about the life you didn't live. You feel sad about the aspirations you had but couldn't achieve. You feel sad for the opportunities you see other people having, because you're a human being with flesh and blood. You might be happy for them, but you still wanted it for yourself too. And grief is a very important thing to know how to process, because inevitably within the course of your life you must face grief, and if you don't know how to safely process grief, it can truly change your very personality. I have seen people who they changed, like a deep degree of grief, bitterness, rejection. Oh wow, rejection is a big one. Different traumas that have been suppressed can cause a lot of grief for someone. And if you don't safely process this grief first through acceptance, and it takes humility to have acceptance, and if you don't have humility, you just can't process grief safely. You can't admit that you're actually on the emotional ground crying because you have lost something that was valuable. You feel jilted or you feel depressed. You have to have humility, because if you wear an S on your chest and a Superman and a cape on your back, you're never gonna admit that you have grief, that you are sad. And so the second point when it comes to accepting new beginnings is grieving the old ones. So step one was realizing that you're gonna have new beginnings, but you also inevitably will have old endings. And step two is knowing how to safely process the emotions and the loss that comes with these old endings. I hope that so far we are together and you're loving this video. And if you are, like below, right on the bottom right, I believe. I'm directionally challenged at this point mentally. But anyway, make sure you like the video and you watch all the way to the end. And if you do know anyone who's going through grief, who might benefit from this resource, share this video widely, not for my benefit, but for the benefit of somebody else. Closely related, when it comes to new beginnings, there's also the realization of just how difficult it can feel to shed layers off. Oh, there is no such thing as a new beginning and a life transformation without having to prune yourself, without having to go under pressure. And I'm doing this because I was mentally picturing someone sandpapering a wall. When you're painting a wall, if you've taken part in any construction, if you've witnessed this before, usually they put stones up first, and then they put like a coat of hardish plaster and then soft plaster. And then when the soft plaster has been put, they sandpaper the wall, because there could be debris, tiny stones that have caught onto the plaster, and you need a smooth base to create a silky coat of paint. I don't know if the steps have changed since the last time I checked, and I unfortunately don't work in construction. But if someone wants to give me a tender for construction, the state of the economy obliges me to say yes. Why would I say no to that? Anyway, you must have a silky smooth base or a good foundation. But you have to do this by sandpapering the wall. And I can only imagine if a wall was an animate object, it would feel very uncomfortable to have, it's like constantly going through scrubbing, like the exfoliation we do on our skin. It's like constantly going through scrubbing and then being told that that's what makes you feel better, that's what's going to make you a better person in the end. It's very similar. Your character gets pruned when you go through grief. You are humbled. You realize just how easy it is for things to change. In my own situation, the grief that I went through was losing people, but not through death. And that's a very unique situation, because often you could come across people who, they're in your day-to-day life maybe, but in terms of your heart posture, there is no meeting of minds. And if you once had a meeting of minds, and if you once experienced bliss and joy in those spaces, it's especially difficult to get over. And I think what can make it even worse is if you have people involved in the situation who are instigators, who are selfish, who are narcissistic, who are self-centered, and who don't care what bridge or what person they have to throw under the bus to get their way. Now that makes it even worse, because where there may have been room for resolution, where there may have been room for forward movement and even negotiation and conflict resolution, insert other word with Ushon, and I'll be a rapper on Spotify. Diversifying my streams of income, yes. Anyway, if there's no opportunity for any of those good things to happen, it becomes even worse. So that's the kind of grief I experienced, and this wasn't too long ago. I wouldn't say that it's fresh, but it's because I had the courage to step out of my comfort zone and say, yeah, this is difficult, this is painful, this feels like an actual death, and yeah, I release it and I need a new beginning. Because if I don't start over, I'm not gonna become the person who's angry, who's toxic, who's dejected, who has a defeatist attitude about everything, who's defensive about everything. And I like to be as bright as the sweater I'm wearing, and I like to feel happy, and I like to feel light, and I like to be around the people who make me feel that way. And that's how I came to my own decision of how I would then access my new beginnings. But that does not mean that the pruning was easy. It is difficult. It is difficult because remember, like with our episode on misalignment, I was sensing the misalignment, but I was also feeling that I could still bargain, I could still try. It's kind of like the same situation when people, women especially, when women are in marriages where they are facing domestic violence. A lot of people like to come and judge and ask, why did you stay? Why did you stay? Why did you stay? Yes,
they ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine.
so people often like to ask the women in those situations, why didn't you leave earlier? Why did you stay? Why did you stay? There are valid points when it comes to asking those questions because they're asked out of love and concern. But at the same time, the questions can be a bit tone deaf to the upbringing someone has had, the level of self-esteem they've had, the history they've had with this person. Maybe they're seeking a version of this person that doesn't exist anymore. And in a similar vein, when it came to my situation, I realized that I also was going through my own process of understanding and grieving and understanding and grieving and realizing what I was losing and who I was losing. So that's how it happens. But the pruning is completely unavoidable. I am so sorry to burst your bubble, guys. I know that this video might not be or at least this portion of the video might not be as romantic as you initially wanted it to be, but I think it will give you better tools to utilize during your stages when you're encountering new beginnings that have old endings attached to them. Another factor that I would like to caution you about when approaching new beginnings is judgment, and especially judgment, external judgment, extrinsic judgment. When we're having new beginnings, I would urge you to protect your new beginnings with privacy, with secrecy when need be. I would urge you to protect your brainchild. Whatever new beginning you have, maybe for you it's like a fitness journey, or maybe for someone else it's a new job, or I wouldn't even say a new job, I'd say like a new relationship. I would urge you to keep your new beginnings protected and to create a safe space for them to thrive. Because more often than not, we forget how people's opinions, people's judgments, and people's biases can affect our actions, especially when we haven't fully anchored ourselves in confidence and we haven't fully anchored ourselves and we're at that stage where we're kind of nervous, wondering, will this work, will this not work? I'm sorry, that is not the time to go share this big idea with other people. First, do it scared, and then you can share it with people. First, do something, and then you can share it with people. When the foundations have been laid so firmly that nothing, no opinion, no judgment, no evil eye can penetrate and take away from what you are building. A lot of times, people can't keep their mouth shut. People can't seem to stay silent and stay discreet about the things that matter very much. So you find a situation whereby someone, let's say, was applying for an opportunity. They go tell their very close friend, and the close friend, who unfortunately has a human moment or a malicious moment, whatever you want to call it, goes, applies for that opportunity. And I know that's a very minuscule example, but if you kept your mouth shut, you wouldn't be in this situation. And of course, it's not the time to tell someone when that happens that you're now giving them life lessons. Nothing could be more insensitive. But let's not operate from a point of naivety. In all my videos, this is what I advocate for. Let's operate from a point of strategy, from a point of intelligence, from a point of information, and from a point of forward thinkingness. You have to be forward thinking if you want to get yourself from point A to point Z. And sometimes you could either walk all the way to point Z, or you could take a flight to point Z, but it's not effective to keep taking yourself from point A to point C to point D to point negative Z. Like, you have to be very careful about new beginnings, because that energy of newness is also very fickle. Because just think about the new year. By the time the new year comes around, we're already, gyms are full, people are happy, people are journaling. When March rolls around, and like I said the other day on Instagram, I am not ashamed to say I have fallen off in March. Before it used to be because I was very, very busy, and that would be the time that work would start picking up and getting so busy, but alongside other life factors. But I can say with confidence, people fall off, and sometimes it's because we unfortunately live in the age of information where things are happening on our screen so much. We lie to ourselves that if I've listened to this motivational podcast like this one, or if I've read this book and I've watched this movie and all of that, and I've psyched myself up with all the knowledge I have, that is enough. We forget to be action oriented first. And because of this, the energy of new beginnings is very fickle for us, because we start things and then we leave them. We start things and then we leave them. And that makes us lack a sense of consistency and a sense of follow through. And like I said, I am not immune to this. Just because I am sharing this doesn't mean that I am immune to it, or that I've never experienced my fair share of the same thing. Not at all. No one is immune. So just as a cautionary tale, please seize the energy of new beginnings and keep your mouth shut. What you do not want to deal with is, in addition to your own anxiety, your own internal doubts, your own imposter syndrome, dealing with the judgments and the negativity of other people. One thing I think I can really truly commend myself for is that I have learned how to, it surprises. There's someone in my life who kind of gets surprised by this trait of mine. I think I've had the privilege of having isolation and solitude for a very long time, which can feel very lonely, but at the same time, it makes your internal voice grow to the point where you are very certain and very sure about yourself. And because of this, I think one of the things that I've benefited from is being able to embrace new beginnings without feeling the need for announcement culture. And therefore, I don't often deal with the judgment that comes with people critiquing your very new ideas, your very new ventures. Because sometimes people critique, and it isn't because they're jealous or they're nasty or they're mean or they have evil eye. Sometimes people project the internal limitations they have about themselves towards other people, because they think,
if I can't start a business, I don't know why this beautiful, amazing young girl could do it. She's 5 years younger than me. How could she possibly do it? That can't happen.
So you start taking that judgment and you start taking that critique as something that is worth your time. And that's the problem. You should keep your mouth shut when it comes to new beginnings. Number 5, you might deal with a lot of contradictions. And this is a very natural part of the process. The reason why I think it's very important to mention all these seemingly unpleasant or negative factors when it comes to new beginnings is so that when you walk into them, you can still seize the new beginning, you can still enjoy the new beginning, you can still enjoy the lightness that comes with it, and you aren't confused. Quick story time. For me, I had a very difficult time a few years back when it came to understanding the season of my life that I was in at a particular time. So it would be like a situation where I have a new beginning, and at the same time, I'm feeling so much sorrow, so much loss, so much disappointment, and it would confuse me because why? Going back to the first point, I wasn't able to perceive what was going on. I didn't have the mental or the spiritual antenna to actually see this is a new beginning. But if you're going from complete turbulence to calmness, it might take some time for everything to be completely still, and that discomfort is what you're going through. So even as I talk about contradictions, it's more so to empower you and to let you know that there's nothing wrong with your new beginning. There's nothing wrong with the new season that's happening in your life that doesn't feel perfect or doesn't feel like it was when you saw it in your mind. Because when we see things in our mind, like let me just do this quick experiment, right? Just close your eyes. Just for a second. Close your eyes and imagine your dream life. Let me just say dream life. In your dream life, I picture that everything is beautiful. Let's be very vain with it. Let's think of your dream home and let's think of your dream body. When you think of your dream body, you probably look fit, toned. If you really like fitness, you might look shredded. Now let's come back. When you're thinking of your dream body in that example, you look fit, toned, shredded, you look amazing, right? But if that is in a new you and the current you is a couch potato, you have very little muscle, you don't work out, you're not there yet in a nutshell. So the process of taking you to this shredded version of yourself, that's a new beginning, but there's a lot of discomfort in between. The changing of your diet, the lifting of your weights, the recomposition of your body, the throwing up in the gym when things are too intense, the going on the treadmill and sweating, the looking like a fool when you don't know how to use a Smith machine. Those things are the uncomfortable contradictions I'm talking about. But that doesn't mean that when you have a new beginning and a new routine where you go to the gym every day, or let's say 3-4 days a week, that it won't be this amazing new opportunity. I hope you can now see my point. I feel like such a lame teacher in this video because I feel like I'm just talking about all the inconvenient truths, and I want to talk about the happy parts of the new beginnings. So that's what I'm going to be talking about in the next segment of the video. So I have decided that because we can't exhaust everything in an undertone of warnings and negativity, I don't want to be the one to scare you out of your new beginning. So I've decided that this week we're not going to have 1 but 2 episodes of the Cozy Calendar podcast. And in the next episode of the Cozy Calendar podcast, episode 6, we will talk about the beautiful side of new beginnings and why you should seize them in your healing journey. I hope that with the background of this video that shares some warnings and some pointers for the sake of wisdom, that from there on you'll be able to embrace the lighter side as well. Because in life sometimes there's duality. I'm sorry to be the prophetess of doom today, but I thought it was very important to share that first. See you in episode 6 and watch all the way till the end. Like, subscribe, and most importantly, share with other people that you know would benefit from this content. I love you guys so much and see you in the next few minutes.